Okay. All right. We're live. Although if you're watching this in the archive, we're obviously not live. But the moment we are live, American Hammers TV. This is one of our special episodes. I hope this will turn into a series of episodes with authors, journalists, kind of literary people in the West Ham world. And I'm really, really excited to have with me today our first author, Robert Banks, who is the author of four books on his life supporting West Ham, kind of four memoirs about supporting West Ham. The latest is called An Irrational Hatred of Everything. I would hold up the book cover, but I read it on my phone, on the Kindle, so I'll show it to you. Not sure that's really working.
I'll dash into the other room and get
Yeah, I read so much better digitally than I do on paper that I did this on purpose because I don't have to wear my glasses. Anyway, I don't think you can see that, but Irrational Hatred of Everything, and yes, you can get it on the Kindle if that's how you want it. It's an excellent book. It's really, really worth reading. I've got to go back and read his first three. But Robert, thank you for being with me today.
Thank you for asking.
So you cover this pretty well in your book, but for those who haven't read it, give us, if you would, your kind of West Ham story, your background, how you came to the club, and how it all started for you.
Okay. Well, it all goes back to, for me, well beyond the start of this book, to the 1975 Cup final. My father had bought a colour television that Saturday morning, and the first thing I saw, I would have been 7 years old, 6 or 7 years old. The first thing I saw on it was the cup final, and West Ham in claret and blue playing the very drab Fulham in black and white.
Yes.
And it was just the image stayed with me. Obviously, I was interested in football at that stage, but hadn't really got a team as such. And seeing the claret and blue shirts that day, and West Ham won, of course,
Right.
that sort of got me hooked. But I wasn't, although I followed the team. They're not my local team. I come from Southeast London, not East London, so I'm the wrong side of the river, if you like.
That's Millwall territory, right? Geographically speaking.
Nearer Crystal Palace.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. My London geography is not great. So.
Yeah, the Palace, Charlton, and Millwall are all very close together. But if I was to support my local team, it would be Crystal Palace.
Okay.
But some colleagues of my dad's were big West Ham fans, and they dragged me along. Well, they didn't have to drag me. I went voluntarily, and that really, first time I went was 1978, and that hooked me. I started going regularly in '83 with my school friends, and I suppose you could just say the rest is history. I've just been lumbered with this club for the rest of my life.
Right, you sort of started.
Wouldn't have it any other way.
You sort of started on a high, in 1975 with the cup final, the victory with Bobby Moore playing for Fulham, right? If I'm not mistaken.
That's right, yeah.
And then I suppose you had no idea what you're getting yourself into at that age.
Absolutely not. No, and also, I mean, it's worth remembering when I started going with my friends as a 15-year-old. That season we won our opening 5 games, and I think the first 3 games I saw were a 3-1 win over Leicester, a 3-0 win over Notts County, and a 10-0 win over Bury in the League Cup.
Yes, that's a famous one. Yeah.
Yeah. And you just think, wow, this is all right. I can, it must be my influence.
Right. That's fantastic.
Right.
And your dad was a West Ham fan as well. I know you talked about it in your latest book.
Yeah. He sort of took a big interest in it as a result of me taking an interest in it. I mean, again, he was interested in football, and when I was a kid, he was always pointing Trevor Brooking out to me whenever he played for England, because obviously West Ham weren't on TV,
right?
Unless they were in the cup final. So you could count the number of live games. West Ham were in the 75 Cup final and the 1980 Cup final. The only 2 times they were live on TV in 5 years, and so the only time we ever saw Trevor Brooking live was when he played for England, and my dad always said, "Watch this guy. He's brilliant. He's got two good feet, and he plays for West Ham." So it was another influencing factor in my, in cementing my love for the club.
And that's how, I don't think a lot of people here realize this. That's how TV worked in the UK. It was the cup final was on TV, England was on TV, but the other matches, if I'm not mistaken, were never live on TV. Like there were no league matches ever live on TV.
Even the League Cup final wasn't live until well into the 80s, 1980s, and so yeah, you had the cup final. Um, they had a competition between the England, Scotland, Northern Ireland, Wales called the Home Internationals.
Right.
They were usually on live, um, and World Cup, and that was pretty much it.
Yeah, it's American sports are so tied with television and have been for decades that I don't think a lot of Americans here who watch the Premier League, now we're able to watch Premier League live on my couch in Chelmsford, Mass. I think a lot of people don't realize if you go back a generation, it wasn't even like that in the UK, which I always find interesting. I think that's where a lot of the resentment comes from around people being from London and saying, "Oh, I support Manchester United or Liverpool or whatever."
Mm,
Aside from them being glory hunters, right? It's that
mm.
they couldn't have actually really done that. Let's say 35 or 40 years ago.
Yeah, but having said that, there's an awful lot of Liverpool fans in their 40s living in London, who are Liverpool fans because Liverpool were successful in the 70s, late 70s, early 80s.
Right.
Um, and so it's not just TV that influences those things. I think there was football on TV. There was a highlight show on a Saturday night and on a Sunday afternoon. So
Match of the day.
everyone,
Yeah.
yeah, match of the day, and we had in London we had the big match. It was regionalised on ITV, so we had usually a London team, and we were probably on that more than match of the day. But so you did get to see football.
Yeah. It just wasn't as omnipresent as it is
Mm,
now. So at some point, and I think you wrote your first book in 1990. Is that right?
95.
90. Okay, 1995.
Yeah,
Sorry, I
yeah.
should have been more prepared, but
It's
I,
okay. I'm here.
my boys are on school vacation this week, and I've been home with them all day. I just tucked them away in front of the TV and said, "Do what you want for the next hour and a half, or however
Uh,
long it takes." So I'm semi fried at the moment. Anyway, 1995. So, um, what possessed you? You're not. I don't think. I don't get the impression that you were a writer or a journalist by background necessarily.
no.
What possessed you to sit down and say, "I have to write a book about this"?
Mm. Well, I suppose English was always my primary subject at school, my best subject, and I had considered a career as a journalist. But when I left school, I thought, you know what, they want a degree in English and various other qualifications. I just wanted to get out and start working. So
Yeah.
I put all those ambitions on the back burner, and then um, the writing bug was always there, and I started a creative writing course in '92. It was a correspondence course, so they sent you the tasks you had to do. You would write them and then send them back. They would mark them. And my tutor was very supportive and always said, write about what you know. If you if you're struggling for ideas, write about something that you love. Write about something you understand. And so I wrote a piece about my early years watching West Ham. And he said, I love this. Why don't you write to a few magazines, see if you can get someone to take you on as a columnist. And there was a very, very good fanzine called Overland and Sea,
Yes.
which I'm sure you're aware of.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I wrote to the editor, Gary Firmager, with that very piece. And he was on the phone to me the next day. No, I mean, I could have papered my wall with rejection letters, and at that time, and he was one of the first people to actually read something that I'd written and say, you know what, this is good. And he put it in Overland and Sea. I I contributed to. I probably missed only a few of the next 200 issues. And he suggested to me in '95. He said, "You know what? You should write a book because your style would fit that sort of media." And he also said to me, you know what? If you can't find a publisher, we'll sort of get the money together to self-publish, and we'll get it out on the streets, and we'll sell it with the fanzine.
Nice.
So that was fantastic. Sort of leap of faith on his behalf as well, and it encouraged me to finish it because I think a lot of people start books and never actually get around to finishing them. But I had that incentive of knowing it would see the light of day. And there was an official club magazine at the time called Hammers News. And the editor was a guy called Tony MacDonald. And I sent him a copy of the manuscript that I had. He liked it. Independent UK Sports, who were the publishers, said they'd take it on. And they were publishing Tony Cottee's autobiography at the same time. He was in the office on business and picked up a copy of the manuscript and had a read through it, said, "Oh, this is good, I like this." And he volunteered to do the foreword.
Oh, fantastic.
For the first book. So the foreword for Irrational Hatred of Luton was done by Tony Cottee.
And
he's always...
Phil Parks did the one for your most recent book, for the Irrational Hatred of
That's
Everything.
right, yeah. Former players have always been very supportive. Phil more so perhaps this time, because he shares a lot of the views that I have about the ownership of the club. Maybe we can get into that later, but
I want to
in terms of that's how it started, and Independent published it in October '95. It sold out in a year. Unfortunately, Mr. Cottee's book didn't do quite so well, and they decided not to do any more books.
Oh no!
So when it came to a second edition, Tony and one of his colleagues, a guy called Steve Blowers, who's also written books on West Ham.
Yes.
They formed their own company called Goal Publications and reissued it. And that sold out as well fairly quickly, but we didn't feel there was a market for a third edition at that point. But there was a market for another book, maybe 3 or 4 years down the line, which is West Ham Till I Die,
right?
Which came out in 2000, and then the Legacy of Barry Green in 2003. By which point I'd moved north and wasn't attending many games, and I felt that it was probably a good time to stop.
Yeah, well, that's one of the things you talk about, is you had this, the geographical sort of separation from the club, and you moved to, I think it was Bradford. Again, I've never been to the north of England, so when you get me out of East London or maybe someplace like Bath, I really have not a great sense of where things are. However, being a native Texan, my sense of distance is probably different from the average English person's sense of distance.
Oh yeah. So Bradford's about 200 miles north, but if so to you, that's probably a stone's throw.
Yeah, that's it doesn't quite get you from Dallas to Houston. I think that gets you from about Dallas to Austin. So, yeah. But I mean, transport-wise, that was a difficult situation.
It's not so much. It wasn't so much the transport thing. It's a combination of the distance, because I did go to, I went to most of the Northern away games during that time. It's purely the fact that I was getting married. We were doing a house up, and you have to. You have your priorities, don't you? And something I tried to get across in the book is that some people have criticised me and said, how can you write a book about West Ham when most of the book you're talking about games you didn't even go to? Well, I think that's most people's experience. It's most people's experience that they don't go to as many games as they'd like to. there is a hardcore that go week in, week out, and I was part of that hardcore for 10 years, maybe 15. But you know, you can't go on like that forever if you want to have a life.
Well, and I mean, we obviously being here in the U.S., you know, I did go to the Berlin about 10 years ago with a friend of mine. I've mentioned him on our show many times. He's from East London. He's a pilot for Delta. He flew us over first class, got us hotel
Yeah.
room. It was a really great. It was a great time. We actually saw West Ham win. We beat Birmingham. You might remember this game, February 2010. It was Zola's season when we stayed up on 35 points. You actually,
Diamante's free kick.
yeah, Diamante's free kick. Exactly. There's a chapter in
Yeah.
your book about that. I was so excited that you had named a chapter after this game that I said to my wife, "Oh, there's a chapter about the game I went to," and she just kind of, you know, she's very sweet, right? she's, I like you. I have an unmentionable ex, and I have a wife I've been married to now for well, I got to think about it, 11 years. And she's fantastic. She's wonderful. She doesn't really care anything about West Ham, but she's very supportive of my interest in West Ham. So, but what I was saying is, you know, you talk about not being able to go to games. Obviously, that's the situation with us. We don't, you know, I haven't been to the Olympic Stadium. We're not going to games. A lot of people will say you really can't be a fan if you don't go. Well, I mean, I think the limitation here is pretty understandable.
Yeah.
But one of the things I like about your book actually is that it's not like a I guess a hardcore fan's perspective. I mean, it's not the perspective of somebody who is dogmatic about saying you have to go to every game, you have to know, you know, every goal and every match by heart. You know, I like the fact that you are a real person writing about being a real person supporting West Ham and not somebody who, you know, devotes his entire life to the club. Because as you said, we all have priorities, we have things we have to do. I didn't see, you know, Saturday's game live because I was coaching my son's team. That's just how it has to be sometimes. So the other thing I really like is your time frame for this most recent book is roughly the same as mine as being a West Ham fan, which, you know, it's 2003, 2004 and on. And that's, I think a lot of Americans who support the club came to the club around that time because we didn't really get a lot of Premier League football on TV until the late 90s. And even then it was a highlight show, and it wasn't, you know, it wasn't really a cultural thing until sometime in the mid sort of 2000s. So you brought back a lot of memories of things that I had forgotten about. Not all of them good. You know, some of them not great.
And some horrible ones as well. Yeah.
Some horrible ones as well. Yeah. I guess, what do you think? I mean, obviously you have issues with the owners. I think most West Ham fans do. What do you see right now as you know, the future of the club? I mean, do you see us needing to just sell out to an oil baron or a Russian monarch, or do you see us able to go forward the way we are? Where do you think we are right now?
Yeah, it's a good question. I don't. I think we're kind of living from hand to mouth at the moment as fans, and sort of taking each day as it comes, and trying not to think about that. You know, much as we dislike Gold and Sullivan, and particularly Brady, we're kind of at the moment in a sort of better the devil you know kind of situation, probably, in that there's all sorts of rumours going around about. I mean, I just read one today about the owners of Paris Saint-Germain,
Right.
looking for a sleeping giant in England to make into the next European superpower. We would probably fit that bill, although whether you consider us to have ever been a giant to be sleeping now, I don't know.
Right.
And whether it would fit that category. But the logical step forward would be for, you know, the sort of Man City situation where someone, you know, with interminable wealth comes in and buys Gold and Sullivan out, because that's got to be their aim ultimately. I can't. David Sullivan claims to be a fan, but
No, I don't think
he's from Cardiff. He's not got a history of
right.
supporting the club. David Gold's a slightly different situation. He
might have mentioned once or twice that he was born across from the Bull Inn.
He does mention that every now and then, yeah.
Yes.
442 Green Street.
442
It's just
Green
over,
Street.
it's just
Absolutely.
over there. Yeah, well, yeah, it's opposite a big block of flats now.
Well, everything is at
Yeah.
that over in that area, I guess now. Yeah, it's all become big block flats. One thing we've talked about a little bit with the people we've had on here, both American fans and English fans who live in the U.S. is, if we got the big buyout, if we got the Manchester City treatment or the Chelsea
Mm.
treatment, um, I guess I'm the only one who feels this way. I mean, yes, it'd be great to get rid of Golden Sullivan and Brady. I would have mixed emotions in a way, though, because then West Ham would just become another big money club. And while that would bring us probably a lot of success, although in West Ham's case, you never know, nothing's guaranteed. Our Icelandics went bankrupt, right? They were supposed to
Yeah.
be the saviors, and then their economy collapsed. But if we really did get that kind of owner, I mean, it would pretty fundamentally change the club, even more than it's already changed with the move from the Berlin and so forth. We would go from being this kind of scrappy, blue collar, East London club that you
Mm.
support if you are kind of brave and maybe insane, to being the club that everybody just bandwagons with or wants to be.
Mm.
All the glory hunters support. I mean, what are your thoughts on that? If something like that were to happen, how would you feel about it?
Mm. Yeah, I'd be. I must admit, I think it would change the DNA of the club, and there'd be an awful lot of supporters that would be thinking. I mean, there's enough that have just stopped going already because of the change of stadium.
Right.
Um, but if you're in a situation where you're expected to finish top four every season, that brings with it a different set of pressures, of course. And I think um, it's much more fun to support a football team that um, isn't expected to achieve a huge amount. But when they do achieve it, it's that much more pleasurable. And, you know, West Ham are such a frustrating team to support because just when you think you've turned the corner, just when you get two or three good results together, they slip up inexplicably.
Yes.
Um, and whilst that is frustrating, it's also why we love them. Um, and if the DNA of the club, if the DNA of the club survives, um, oil money or whatever coming into, then that will continue, and you can throw as much money at this club as you want. They'll continue to frustrate, and they'll continue to finish, flirt with relegation every now and then, succumb every now and then. They'll be back. They'll finish mid-table. They'll unearth a decent player. We'll have a couple of good seasons. They'll be sold on.
Before their
It
prime,
carries on.
right? Before the player's prime. Yeah. I mean, to me,
I don't necessarily think a big injection of cash will make a huge amount of difference because we'll still remain relevant, relative, I should say, to everybody else in the league.
yeah, it's interesting. I I have there's a friend I knew in France who is a lifelong Chelsea supporter, going back to long before Abramovich. And last time I spoke to him, and it's been a couple of years,
Mm.
but last time I spoke to him, he told me he doesn't really enjoy it that much anymore. He's actually gone to paying more attention to rugby. He plays rugby. He's Cornish anyway, so it kind of makes sense. But he says it's too good, right? I mean, there's too much pressure to win all the time. People get too upset if they don't
Mm.
win a trophy. There's too many glory hunting fans all around, and it's made him a little less of a fan. And I think you see that a little bit here, in the Boston area. I'm not a baseball fan, but we have the local baseball team, the Boston Red Sox, famously went 86 years without winning the World Series, and this was 1918 was the last time they'd won it before 2004. And prior to 2004, in the years when I lived here, Red Sox fans were fanatical fans. I mean, just like on the edge all the time. It was a lot like supporting West Ham, I guess. And now they've won it four times in the last 15, 18 years, whatever it's been, since 2004. And the atmosphere is different. Everything's changed.
Yeah.
Everybody's a fan, and everybody's very casual, and everybody sort of goes and has a good time, goes to the games to see and be seen, and the intensity of that game experience is gone, as intense as baseball can get, which is not very, but relatively speaking, the intensity of that experience is gone. And again, I wonder if we'd see that. And I have to be honest. I mean, I'm not a 40-year fan the way you are, obviously. although I am old enough to be. I'm not a native. But having supported West Ham now through relegation and promotion and Dimitri Payet and FA Cup final losses and all these other, the move of the stadium and everything else, I would be a little resentful of American fans, not so much English fans, but of American fans coming in if we got the money and saying, oh, hey, I'm a big West Ham fan now. I don't think I could accept that very easily. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, we're in that situation. We're in that situation now. A lot of people are very resentful of what they call the tourists, tourist fans.
Which is, if I went over there, I'd be a tourist, right? So,
Yeah, but there are people who are fans in other countries that come to watch games because they're fans, and that's great. But there are also other people that come because it's a Premier League game, and it's the only one they can get. So that's a different thing altogether. But there's these things that everybody detests. I can't see the problem myself, but they're called half and half scarves. You may have seen them. They're produced for that one game as a souvenir. So you've got West Ham on one side and whoever the opposition are on the other side. There'll be guys selling them outside for £5, and they get lapped up. Everybody, these guys that come along because it's the only game they're going to go to, probably the only Premier League game they're going to go to. So they want to. So they call them the half and half scarf brigade. It's all money into the coffers, although they're not official products. But their money goes into the club through other means.
Well, one of the things I wanted to ask you about with the West Ham support, and speaking of things people hate, you talked a lot in your book about social media. We use social media. Tim and I, in doing American Hammers TV, and the people who have helped us, we use it because there's no other way to reach people, especially across the country. So we kind of have to use it. I don't really like it, but it's kind of a necessity. But my impression of West Ham support is that if you go back far enough, there have always been factions, differences of opinion. I think if you go back to the days where there was a lot of violence, there was even a lot of literal infighting among West Ham fans. So do you think that social media has made that worse, or do you think it's just shown a spotlight on what was already there?
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, social media magnifies things, obviously, and gives you a much more instantaneous response. So, and I touch on this in the book, as you say, and it's something I believe in, is that before social media, you still had all these different groups of fans from different social backgrounds, from different political views, different views on the players, on how the club should progress. But you always tended to stick around the people that shared your views. So you're going to and from the game, you're sitting having a pint before the game. You'll all be pretty much of the same opinion, and the people around you will be pretty much the same opinion. What you get with social media is all of these different groups of people mixing, and it's a tinderbox. It's gonna because a lot of people don't are less self-aware when they're using social media. They have fewer qualms about insulting or about it's like I likened it the other day. It's a bit like when you're in your car. When you're in your car and someone pulls out in front of you, you call them all the names under the sun. If you're walking down the street and someone walks out in front of you, you apologize. It's one of these things where you're detached from reality almost, and you lose all all sort of what's the word I'm looking for? All sense that the other person might not like that, might be offended, and because you can't necessarily see their facial expressions, you can't see how they're reacting. It just makes things a whole lot worse, I think, particularly last year when we had the issues with the march, and there were all sorts of issues with politics.
The flag is falling down in the background. Very
It's a
well.
West Ham flag. It's a West Ham flag. That's what it does.
Exactly. Sorry, go ahead.
It'll come back. It'll come back up again. Don't worry.
It always does. Yes.
Uh, and it's been a long time since politics got involved in anything to do with West Ham fans interacting with each other, and unfortunately, yeah, there are West Ham fans come from a wide diverse socioeconomic and demographic background, and there are always going to be people who see things in different ways. Social media makes it just focuses on that.
It's funny that you should mention the march and a lot of these things that happened last season. Um, I I have a mixed perspective about this. On one hand, I think that riot. It's not really a riot. That's not the right word. But I think the, let's say, pitch invasion against Burnley in the Burnley match. I think it's one of the reasons why Gold, Sullivan, and Brady went out and spent £100 million or so in the summer. I think they saw that there was genuine, um, you know, discontent among the fans, even though they're obviously still making their money because the stadium sells out. But I think they saw. On the other hand, and I think you talk about this in the book as well. I never fully understood exactly what the march was supposed to be about, except saying we're not happy. But did you ever understand kind of what the specific demands were, and were they realistic? And if the board had wanted to do something, could the board have done something about it?
The second I heard that there was going to be a march, I was against the idea, simply because I felt it would descend into not necessarily through anything to do with West Ham fans, but fans of other clubs would find out about it and cause trouble just to make us look bad.
Right.
Or, taking a completely cynical point of view, that the hierarchy in the club would ensure that something went wrong in order to sort of say, well, look, there you are. This is what we're dealing with. We're dealing with a bunch of thugs. Why should we listen to you? So I was skeptical about it from day one. And one of the reasons I was skeptical was because there were so many, where do you start when you come to trying to explain what's wrong? And as I'm saying before, you've got groups of people from different parts of the country, with different political views, different economic backgrounds, different periods of time that they've been supporters. So you've got people that have been supporting the club since the 50s, coupled with people that have been supporting the club just in the last few years, that have got very, very different views on how things should progress and what is wrong. And you had people that were pro-bald as well. Believe it or not, there are people that think the sun shines out of their, Yeah.
I think they're plants by the board, but
I wouldn't. No, I have met some. They do exist. So I think eventually they settled on five, a core of five demands, but then that was causing problems as well, because no one, well, what about this one, and what about that one? Why isn't that in the top five? It was always going to be difficult, and I'm not completely aware of what went on, but it was all a very, very strange situation that it all got called off at the last minute, and that was the worst thing that could happen, because there was so much anticipation and expectation, and so many people looking forward to this march. It was bound to boil over. Excuse me. And that's what happened with the Burnley game. The tensions just boiled over, and I think if the march had gone ahead, we wouldn't have had that sort of situation within the stadium. But
you talked about the atmosphere in the stadium being sort of poisonous at that time. And there was money involved too. This march raised like 25,000, 30,000 pounds, something like that. Did it go to? Does she pronounce her name Isla, the little girl with cancer? Is it Isla? How do you pronounce it?
Isla.
Isla. Okay, I'm sorry. I never knew. I'd never heard anybody say it. So anyway, this poor little girl with neuroblastoma, who seems to be doing, fortunately, much better. But there was talk that it would go to her or to her cause, which is wonderful. But do you know if that happened? Do we know what happened? Because there was kind
Yeah,
of a decent amount of money floating around that just sort of, oof.
yeah. As far as I know, the family have acknowledged that the money was paid to the fund,
Okay.
and um, they're not raising any issues. So I don't know any more detail than that,
Yeah.
to
Well,
be
that's good
honest.
to hear. That's good to hear. And I don't want to charge anybody with being dishonest. I just didn't know.
Yeah,
It's funny that this, as you said, there's a lot of buildup about this, and I followed this pretty closely on social media, which is the best way I had to do it. And then all of a sudden, it just went away.
mm,
So I, so I mean, I guess we're getting back to what I was talking about before. On the one hand, I think this, I don't know, civil disobedience idea, if you want to call it that, in the context of a football club, can be effective. But it seems a shame that it seems to have devolved into a lot of fans just sniping at each other a lot, and then a weird like political bent that um, I
mm,
didn't expect. And I'm not super familiar with all the class divisions in the UK, and I only know a surface level amount about politics, but it's probably not dissimilar to what we have here. Um, what do you think about the
mm.
power of like the ICF, for instance, or the guys who claim to have been in the ICF? They seem to have sort of taken over this movement. What's your take on them, and how much power they actually have?
Uh, well, as you know, I've never been a fan of um, um, the whole movement or the whole. I think it resonates throughout the book that I'm not
Yes,
never
absolutely.
never 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 been proud of the history of uh, the ICF and their involvement with West Ham. They don't speak for me, and I'm fairly sure I don't speak for them, and they would be the first to acknowledge that. I, I really don't. I don't have an opinion about their involvement. Um, I think I have to be fairly careful what I say. Just
No, no, I understand that.
yeah,
I don't want to
yeah,
get
yeah,
in trouble. I really don't.
yeah.
I've read a couple of the books, and they're entertaining. I personally am kind of a pacifist. I'm not a violent person at all, so
Mm,
I wouldn't say that's something that I would support either. But I know it's part of the club's history, and I was trying to get a feel
yeah.
for, are
There
these?
are a lot of people that are very proud of them and look up to them.
Yeah,
Uh, that's all I can say.
yeah, that makes sense. That makes sense. No, I think that's a fair and diplomatic thing to say.
Yeah.
Um, Beyond that, I'm curious as to uh, if you could make changes to West Ham right now, and within the context of the owners we already have, the stadium we already have. I mean, realistically, other than saying sack the board or rebuild the Berlin, what would you do? What's the first thing you would want to see?
Well, it depends how big a magic wand you've got. Obviously, the thing that's disappointed me so much since the stadium move, and probably for the couple of years beforehand, has been that the exposure of the disunity between fans, and people always talk about the West Ham family, and we're all West Ham, ain't we? Um, but it's not been like that. We're not all West Ham. In the last few years, we're this section of West Ham fans. We're that section of West Ham fans. The thing I would change if I could would be to get everyone of a single mind again, and to get everyone supporting the club rather than sniping at each other.
Do you think it's
And I
gotten
think,
worse? Has it gotten worse since the stadium moved?
oh, without a doubt, yeah, yeah. I, I think it was always, as I said before, it was always there, but because you didn't have the methodology to interact with each other, the different groups didn't have the facility of social media or the technology to interact with each other. You pretty much kept your opinions within your little group. But um, I suppose the bond scheme in 1992 was one of the few times when everyone was of was pretty much of the same opinion, and it was a similar, the guy who came on with the corner flag.
Yes, that was
that has its roots in the Bond scheme.
Yeah,
the Bond scheme protest, and no one wanted that Bond scheme. Even those people that did buy the bonds, I felt, did it because they felt it was going to be the way forward, and they wanted to guarantee their season ticket. But I don't think anyone felt it was a good idea. I don't think there's been complete unity at the club ever since then. It's difficult to measure, but it's the one thing that really I feel uncomfortable sometimes in some social media areas when I see some of the conversations that people are having and the arguments that people are having. Try and keep out of them if at all possible. That's what I would change. And the apart from that, that's a bit of a tall order, that one. But other than that, I think just the structure of the stadium. I quite like the location. I quite like the new location. Obviously, it's not Upton Park, and I sympathise with people who continue to talk about Upton Park, but it's gone. I loved it, and I'll always remember it, and we'll always have the videos and the archives. But it ain't coming back, and we have to make the most of what we've got, and that would mean, to me, that. Well, I'd be quite happy if they knocked the place down and started again, to be honest. When you see what Spurs have achieved.
We've talked about that here, actually. I mean, it's funny because I obviously don't have to go to the Olympic Stadium. I'd like to go at some point. I know I'll get over at some point. Tim, who's usually my co-host here, went to the last two matches of the season last year, and he really enjoyed it. And I think I really enjoyed it if I went. But it's certainly when I see it on television or see pictures of it, it's not what I thought it was going to be. You don't have the seats are a long way from the pitch. We have the claret carpet now, so that should really bring everybody together around the spirit of.
As one of my friends said the other day, he said, when I was a kid growing up in the East End of London, I dreamed of one day supporting a football team that would have a claret carpet around the pitch,
right, with badges and everything on it. Yeah, very swanky carpet. No, but I. As you said, it's gone, and there's a West Ham fan in Las Vegas who was born in Canning Town and grew up going to the matches, and it's probably not far off your age. And he, mentioned when we had him on a few weeks ago that there were days at the Bowlen when there were 15,000 people there, and there wasn't a great atmosphere. The team wasn't great, and it wasn't always, the clips we see of, West Ham coming back up in the early 90s from relegation, the goal against Cambridge, I think, whoever it was, when Billy Ball. It wasn't always like the pitch invasions and the good times. There were bad times back then too. One thing I'm curious about, hypothetically, let's say we avoid injury. Let's say we're able to bring in some, the transfer budget is bigger than expected. We bring in some decent players. We avoid injury. Let's say we finish top 6 next season. How much do you think that solves if the club just does better on the pitch?
Yeah, it does make a big difference. I think people are a lot more willing to forgive other people's indiscretions if there are if the fare that's being served up on the pitch is a lot, and they'll moan a lot less about the board as well if the team's winning. Let's face it, if there's one thing the board do seem to have learned, and there's one compliment I will give them, that they've kept their trap pretty firmly over the last 18 months or so. It's been a delight to be able to pick up the newspapers and not have to read about some foot in mouth situation that one of the chairmen has put us in. So
they've said were incredible. I mean, Karen Brady's comments about how they didn't want to sign Snodgrass. I don't know. You go through a lot of these in your book. You catalog these things in your book. It's just and when I go back and read them, either didn't know that they had said these things or I didn't remember. And it's astonishing. I mean, it's just
Yeah.
staggering how unprofessional it all is.
Mm. Yeah. So I mean, I think Karen Brady still has her column in the Sun, the
Classy
Sun
publication.
newspaper,
Yeah,
which
great,
is
great newspaper.
inexplicably one of the most popular newspapers in this country. But um, what can you say?
Yeah.
Um, despite despite the all the criticism, she continues with that. So it must be worth a fair amount of money to her because she's a very wealthy lady.
I
So
think her
uh,
ego, it doesn't hurt her ego either to have that column, is my guess. She
mm,
just likes to have that platform. You know, that's my
yeah,
impression of her anyway. Um, you talk
you may
to,
be right.
the match day experience. Um, and I'm with you when I go to any sporting event, and we go to all sorts of things around here. A lot of it for me is just being with friends, having a couple of beers, having a good day out. And I mean, the result matters, but it's not all that
Yeah,
matters because part of it's just a good day out. How is that getting any better
yeah,
now at the new stadium than it was in the beginning?
yeah, yeah. I think it was always going to take time to um, you're airlifting everybody from uh, everybody had their routines. Everybody had um, you'd always meet in the same pub, and you'd been doing it for years, and then suddenly you're put in an area where even though it's still only a mile up the road, you're not familiar necessarily with all the local facilities um, and what you can do, how you can travel there, how you can get back, how you can where you can go for a drink, what you can get to eat, how far it is to walk. So it's taken, I think, for me personally, 3 years. We've only just got into a rhythm of finding a regular place to go for a drink, something to eat, a regular time to get through security now because you have to go through security,
Nice.
um, and I think that there are there are places available for everybody. It's just you've got to find what suits you best, and it's taking time, but it's starting to work for me. We've even got our little corner in the London Stadium where we stand and have a good sing song, um, and that's taken a while to sort of
Yeah.
for everybody to find. I think Gio was making this point. I was watching the one from last week, um,
Mhm.
saying that it's sort of a natural migration because the migration was done in such a way, a wrong way, where they um, invited people in the various bands. The pricing structures were done most expensive tickets first, got first choice, and they could invite two, three, four people to sit with them. So
And
of
it
course,
broke up the groups. It broke up
um,
the factions.
yeah,
Yeah.
what should have happened was they would literally lift everyone out of their seats at Upton Park and drop them in the same areas in the London Stadium, and then there wouldn't have been half the issues with people standing and sitting and whatever. But they put a little group of people who would have previously stood up with a little group of people that would have previously sat down, a little group of people who were maybe a bit older next to people that are a bit younger, and the mix didn't work well. It's taken 3 years, but I think gradually everybody's found their own level and their own little part of the ground that they like, um, and also has to fit the budget as well, fit their pockets. And for me, the most expensive tickets in the stadium are not the best ones because they're further away from the pitch. The ones on the halfway line
Yes.
are a mile away.
They have to be. You'd have to
So
be looking at it. You can tell. Yeah.
yeah, just by basic physics says that's going to have to be the case. But I can't remember
Oh
what the
no.
original question was. Now we were talking about match day
Yeah.
experience, weren't we? And yeah, for me, it's always been about um, having time together with your friends. Because if it was about the result, I wouldn't support West Ham.
Nobody would, right? Yeah, it has to be about. Well, it has to be, and
No.
I think that gets back to what you were saying about kind of the notion of a West Ham family and how it's splintered, and that seems really unfortunate, given that one of the things, really, the reason I support West Ham and started supporting West Ham was because of the fans I met in person, the fans I met online. They had the best sense of humor. They were the most fun, and they had the best perspective. And I didn't want to support anybody else because I didn't want to hang out with other people's fans. I didn't like the other fan groups. So it's if you start getting these divisions among West Ham fans, you're cutting right into the soul of the club there, to me.
Yeah, I mean, one of the first things that struck me when I first started going to games in the early 80s was just the humour on the terraces. And I've been to watch other clubs. I've been to watch other teams with friends who support other teams and whatever. And there's obviously, any group of young men or young or middle-aged men that gather together have banter, don't they? They call it banter.
Right.
Banter is usually an excuse for offending somebody.
Yes.
No, it's just banter. But that sort of they're always taking the mickey out of each other. They're always, there's a particular thing about West Ham. It's such self-deprecation as well, which you just wouldn't get at Arsenal, for example.
You don't.
I don't know why I picked that example, but you just wouldn't get that. Or at Manchester United, they all take themselves so seriously.
And it gets compounded here in the U.S. among people who are not natives and people who support the top six clubs. They're just up their own backsides, to put it in a family-friendly way. I think they're as bad as the English supporters you run into of those clubs, and maybe even worse. Arsenal, Tottenham may be the worst here in the U.S. because they think they support some little boutique club, and then it makes them like, oh, I support Tottenham, so I suffer so much by supporting this club that's in the top four to the Champions League semifinal, and we're just a little scrappy little club, That's kind of the American attitude, and it's just total garbage. And yeah, to me, we've talked to a lot of American West Ham fans now in the last 2.5 months, and everybody we've talked to has been fun, entertaining, had a good perspective, a good sense of humor. That's to me, that's really what it's all about. And so I can understand when we talked about the one thing you would change about West Ham, the idea is let's get back to that in more of a communal way, as opposed to all the infighting.
Yeah, but it's harder to get back to that when you're, say when I first started going, the biggest crowds would have been about 30, 32. When the bowling was at its peak as an all-seater, it was around 35. Now suddenly we're talking about 60, 62, 65 eventually. Can it be reproduced on a bigger scale? I don't know. We still have our little pockets of friends and whatever, and we'll still have that banter. So I really hope that it will continue, and that the divisions do eventually heal.
What's your personal take on people like me who support West Ham from a long way off, who aren't natives, who almost never get to go over there? What do you think? We're just crazy or plastic, or how do you feel about us?
Yeah.
Not glory hunters, though. Yeah. We know that.
Well, I think it's almost like an honourable club, isn't it, of crazy people? I mean, why would you if you want to pick a Premier League team, why on earth would you pick West Ham? Probably because you're of a similar mindset to the majority of West Ham fans. I do think there is something in it. There's something in the club, and all clubs have DNA. There's absolutely no doubt about that. And as a result, if you ask any West Ham fan, they'll say, I'm a West Ham fan, but I've also got a soft spot for X, Y, or Z,
Mhm.
and there'll be a reason. They're often the same clubs, so you'll often find West Ham fans. Some West Ham fans like Ipswich.
Mm.
They'll like Nottingham Forest.
Mhm.
They'll like oh, I don't know. Can't think of another example. Personally, I've got a big soft spot for Queens Park Rangers,
Well, you have a
but
friend who's a Queen's fan too. He's a
that's
big
it.
one.
That's part of it. That's part of it as well. But they have a very similar outlook. Most QPR fans have a very similar outlook. They're very self-deprecating. Don't take
Yeah.
themselves too seriously. And let's face it, they don't achieve a huge amount. So
Right.
they're in a similar sort of they've had a real shitty ride over the last. Oh, sorry, I can't say that, but
No, you can. No, you can.
yeah,
It's fine. It's
yeah,
fine. You can say
yeah.
that.
So what do I think of American or people from abroad that support West Ham? I think you're mad. I, but the more the merrier, as far as I'm concerned. Like I say, there's a big difference between. Well, I've got a tickle. Excuse me. There's a big difference between the people who support the club and love the club from afar and those that come to experience the Premier League experience and spend the whole time taking selfies. It's I have the greatest of admiration for you for having such, particularly for spending so much time in producing stuff like this, which is absolutely great. My wife is, as you know, she's from Brazil,
Yes.
and there's a 7,000 strong West
Yeah,
Ham
you
group
mentioned that in the
in
book.
Brazil.
7,000 fans. Well, I'll tell you. I'm part of a
Yeah.
group on Facebook called West Ham France. I didn't know any of those people when I lived there, but I found them later on, and I don't know how many there are. There may not be more than 50 or 60, but there they are, a bunch of French, and they're not all, it's not from the days of Pyatt because he's long gone. They're just West
Yeah.
Ham fans who, for whatever reason, they're French and they love West Ham. I always say that I didn't choose West Ham. West Ham chose me. Um,
Yeah.
for me, I can relate to not being a winner. I can relate to struggle. I can relate to, constantly cocking up at the absolute worst time. Um, you know, my life has been a mixed bag of success and failure, to say the least. And I don't feel comfortable, calling myself a supporter of a successful club or a big club. West Ham makes a lot of sense to me as a club to support. It's the only one that ever tugged at the heartstrings because it's the only one I ever watched and thought, that's pretty much what I'm like. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's just.
I mean, I have a club. I have a club in Brazil that I support, but I have to because it's my wife's family's tradition. So
Which one is?
they all support Sao Paulo.
Oh, Sao Paulo. Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, but they have a similar. They've been very successful in the past,
Right.
but in recent history, they've again similar. Constantly throwing stuff away at the last minute and big city underdogs, I suppose you'd say, compared to Corinthians and Palmeiras and Santos. They've constantly underachieved over the years, so I do have some sort of identification there.
Yeah, the underachieving it's underachieving, the self-deprecation, the humor. It speaks to me. It speaks to me in a way no other club does. And I'm with you on another thing. Every time we win or even manage a draw, if it's a top six opponent, I'm thrilled. I'm thrilled. I worked with a guy a couple of years ago who was from Versailles. He's a PSG supporter. Lifelong PSG guy. So he goes back to before the money. They used to be pretty mediocre in their time when I lived there in the 2000s. They weren't really that good. But now every match, I in France I follow Saint Etienne, which is a club that kind of peaked in the 70s and hasn't really done much since. But we used to talk about the matches on Fridays, and every game he would say, "Well, we're playing Nantes, or we're playing Toulouse, we're playing Bordeaux," and he'd say, "We should be okay, we should win." And it's just an attitude that I have trouble having. I don't. I'm much happier when we go in and we beat Manchester United and we beat Arsenal, we beat Everton, and it's a huge thrill compared to a relief. Like we're supposed to win anyway. That's one of the things that if we ever did get the money, that's one of the things that I think I would miss is this idea that, hey, we were giant killers today.
Yeah.
We're like against Manchester United last weekend. we outplayed them. We should have beaten them. We got robbed again. But I won't get into my Premier League conspiracy theories. You can watch other episodes of the show to do that. Very quickly, I don't want to hold you too much longer. My wife's going to be home soon anyway, but very, very quickly.
I appreciate what you say. You don't want to hang, but something I've thought of recently that that illustrates the point you were making about people jumping on bandwagons and the ladies team recently.
Oh yes, wonderful.
On Sunday, got to the cup final.
Yes,
and I'm delighted. I'm over the moon for them. Really, really, really happy. And I have been sort of keeping an eye on how they've been progressing because I knew they were doing quite well. And the game was on TV on Sunday, so I watched all the second half and the extra time and penalties. But the cup final clashes with the last home game of the season against Southampton. So Southampton's a 3:00 kickoff. The cup final kicks off at Wembley at 5:30. So there isn't time for the majority of fans to get there. And there's a campaign going to try and get one of the games moved. And a lot of people saying, "Well, were you suddenly interested in women's football? You know, where have you?" And I can see a kind of comparison there with what you might experience with how you suddenly a West Ham fan. But it's in your nature, isn't it? It's in your you want to see the team do well, and when they do well, any aspect of the team doing well is you want to support it.
They were cool. And they sing Bubbles, and it's funny that you should mention this. I mean, Tim and I have actually invited several of the women's players to come on and be on our show with us. There are 3 American players. We've invited them. They are willing to do it. They have to get through the PR people at the club who haven't given them permission yet. We're here in the U.S. Women's football only pops up every 4 years during the World Cup. But when the Women's World Cup comes up, it's really, really popular. I used to be an actual journalist years ago, and I never got paid to do this, but I used to cover the women's football club here in Boston for a website just for fun, for free. That was about 10 years ago. So I've watched women's football for a long time. As soon as West Ham's team, last season sort of started to be more, prominent, I started to follow it. We followed it over here, but I think that's largely an American thing because our women are so good. And they've won so much that we have more of a familiarity with the game. But yes, you're absolutely right. I've seen the same thing on Twitter. I've seen the same thing on Facebook. People saying, "Oh, I can't decide whether to go to Southampton or go to Wembley." And there is this sense of like, well, you're just a glory hunter now because they're in the FA Cup final. Suddenly you're a fan. It's not totally wrong. And I do think you'd get a lot of that if if we had a big owner come in and buy us out, and then all of a sudden, oh well, hey, I've always kind of liked West Ham.
Yeah.
I wanted to ask you.
Sorry, I went off course. Sorry.
No, not at all. Not at all. I'm glad you mentioned it. Actually, we try to mention the women as often as we can because we're very proud of them, and again, we're supporters, and we want to have them be part of our experience and part of the American experience too. And there are, again, 3 American women, at least 3 or 4 who play for the team. So it's good for us. Aside from the move away from the Boleyn, which is, to me, the obvious answer to this question. Let's say the last 15 years, in the time that's spanned in the irrational hatred of everything. What was your high point and your low point? Other than that, which is obvious to me, it's got to be the obvious low point. What was your high point and low point in the last 15 years?
Oh gosh, how many over what period, or as a fan generally?
I would say as a fan, going back to let's say 2003 all the way up through last season, the time period the book covers, the most recent book covers.
Yeah, I think the low point for me was probably Sam Allardyce. The
cupping of the ear. Simple.
Yeah.
Yes.
That was enough. You remember the story in the book about the club digging their heels in over my dad renewing his
very
season
well.
ticket.
It's infuriating, by the way. Yes.
Yeah. And I didn't. That was partly that. It was partly the the painful football that we were having to watch at the time, which is something else that we talk about. Being a West Ham fan is about not winning all the time, but it's about losing in the right way as well, and playing the game, playing a gentlemanly game, hard but fair,
right,
and playing with style and passion.
Playing with passion, playing with flair, playing attacking football, playing attractive football. If you lose 4-3, better to lose 4-3 playing attractive football than to win 1-0 like we did at Hull or against Hull.
Yeah. So I think the majority of West Ham fans, even today, would take what we saw last Saturday, a heroic 2-1 defeat, a game we should have won and we were let down by the officials.
Yes.
Than a 2-1 win under Sam Allardyce, which was like having pins stuck in your eyes. So for me, I would say that was the lowest ebb. For me, my high points all came too early on.
Fair, yeah, that's fair.
Yeah, 85, 86, you'd struggle to top that. Seeing Cottee and McAvenny banging goals in every week. And not necessarily expecting to win, because I don't think we really thought we were in with a shout at winning the title until maybe the last 5 or 6 weeks. We lost so many games through the bad winter that we were still 5th or 6th, but we had lots of games in hand. But I think we only lost at home twice all season, and when we won, we were winning. We were winning in style.
Yeah, I've only seen the video clips and the highlights.
What a team that was!
I wish I was old enough to remember that. I just wasn't. I was too American. I was 11 years old in 1985. Turned 12 at the end of 1985. But so I could have remembered it, but it was too. I didn't know it was happening. I that would have been fantastic. I think for me, outside of the stadium situation, which hasn't really affected me all that much directly, I think the saddest story for me has been the Dimitri Pyatt saga. I really loved him, and I don't know exactly what happened. I know about all the rumors and so forth, which we've discussed here on the show before, but I just hated the way it ended. Because he to me was the next legend, and I think we're going through a little tiny version of that right now with Marko Arnautovic. Very small, very scaled down version of it, but it feels the same,
It's interesting, isn't it? How the outcome is different in that Arnautovic stayed and Pyatt left,
right?
But the ultimate result is the same. You end up with disruption to the team, disaffection throughout the team, and this time round it's probably worse because we've ended up with a player on a longer contract on more money. Rather than a large transfer fee, which we got in the Pyatt case. So both situations could possibly have been handled better. But if Pyatt had stayed, who's to say we wouldn't have the same situation as we have now with Arnautovic?
I think we would have ultimately. I think whatever happened with his family, again, a lot of rumors about what happened there. But the point is, he wanted to go back to France. He wanted to go back to Marseille. He didn't want to go to Manchester United. He didn't want to go to Real Madrid. He wanted to go back home. And that's what he did. And if he did that to save his family, then I respect that immensely. I do. I hate the fact that he quit on us. It bothers me that he quit on us. But again, it's all water under the bridge now. But he looked like a savior to me, and then it all fell apart. And Arnautovic never quite had that profile. But I think you're right. I think if Pyatt had stayed, if he'd been forced to stay, if that sort of thing could happen, I think it would have gone the same way.
You can't in any, even going back 40 years, 50 years, if you've got a player who doesn't want to play for the club, let them go.
Yes.
Not interested. If you don't want to play for the club, go.
Well, look how we did last weekend with Arnautovic, not even in the team at all. He wasn't on the bench, wasn't in the starting 11, and that's the best effort we've put out since I don't know, maybe Newcastle at home. I'm having to go back here. I don't really remember, but it's been weeks, it's been months, since we've looked that good. and he wasn't involved at all. And Anderson was back, and
Yeah.
he was clicking, and so I feel I'm with you. If he doesn't want to play, then it's hard and it's painful, but we have to let him go, and hopefully we get something for him, and we're able to bring.
Now we put him on a bigger contract, and I doubt if we'll get the sort of money that was being talked about in January. So
no. I don't think even close. No. Yeah, I just hope we can get some sort of return for him. I don't know what it'll be. He hasn't done himself any favors with his behavior, I don't think, and appealing to clubs. So although he can still play, and he's a striker, and they're hard to come by. So so we'll find out. I wanted to let you know again, I thoroughly enjoyed your book. So you have your most recent book is An Irrational Hatred of Everything. Prior to that was, I think, The Legacy of Barry Green. Is that right?
That's right. Yeah, 2003. So that was 15 years ago. Yeah. 2003,
and then West Ham Till I Die, and then the first one was An Irrational Hatred of Luton, which is we talked about this yesterday as we communicated a little bit on Twitter. That's a reference that it's a little too early for me, but apparently Luton was a real thorn in West Ham's side for a long time.
Yeah. You can go back to, I think it was 80-81. We won the second division with a record points total, but Luton managed to do the double over us that season. They knocked us out of various cups. That 85-86 season, they beat us at home. One of the few teams. But if we win that game, then we win the league that season. You could say that about any of the games we lost. I know, but
you can also say about that one. That's the point. Yeah.
It's easier to make it about that one.
I think anybody who watches our show, who's an American fan, who probably came to the club in the last 10 or 15 years, or even more recently than that, should absolutely read your books for history and context and perspective and humor. And again, because it's not preachy, it's not sort of overly technical. It's just a fun read. It's up and down. Your personal stories are really touching in a lot of cases. The one about your dad really got to me. My dad died 3 hours before my younger son was born.
Oh my God!
And I was with, fortunately, before midnight. So Andrew's birthday is not the same day. But I was in Texas with my dad, and my wife went into labor like a week early in Boston, and so I wasn't there when he was born, and it was, kind of a roller coaster. So it brought back a lot of memories for me, a lot of personal memories for me that, are not super relevant to West Ham, but that's part of life. And I just enjoyed your writing. I enjoyed your candor, and I super appreciate you being on with me today. And will you come back and do it again sometime?
Sure. Yeah, I'd love to.
Yeah, it was a lot of fun. It was fantastic. So again, if I had the book to hold up, I would. That's what you're supposed to do on a talk show, but
just wait there 1 second.
Okay, yeah, go get it. Go get it. He's coming back with the book.
Terrible.
There we go.
It's all back to front, of course. But there we have it.
It's perfect. There, an Irrational Hatred of Everything. It's fantastic. I hope you'll do another one in another 10 or 15 years, and maybe you can throw a shout to American Hammers TV in the next one.
No problem.
All right. Well, Robert, thank you so much for being with us. Come on, you Irons, as always. And hang out with me for just a second. I'm going to stop our live broadcast, and then we can.
Okay.
All right. So we will see you guys. Actually, if you're watching live right now, we'll see you in a little less than 5 hours. We have Charleston, South Carolina on tonight. The Holy City Hammers. High expectations there for Charleston, South Carolina. So Tim and I will be back on tonight in a few hours. And all right, everybody who's on live, thanks for watching.